Tired of big tech clashing with your Catholic values? Feday Chat is now live on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. It's private, encrypted, and built by Catholics for Catholics, with features like parental controls and more. Connect securely with family, friends, and groups. Download Feday Chat at feday.email. Technology without compromise.
Most serious Catholics would love it if the Roman Curia and people who were bishops and cardinals who work for Rome would speak bluntly about salvation. To even hear them use the word salvation would be refreshing. To hear talk of how our souls need the grace of Jesus Christ, to embrace the grace he offers us, to carry our cross, follow him, so that we may spend eternity with him in the beatific vision. That would be great. We rarely hear about actual salvation very often. And that's why it was so curious when a cardinal of the Roman Curia invoked salvation in a new and, dare I say, novel way. I've never heard how he's about to use this word used this way before. So we're going to go right into this. This is coming from that radical traditionalist website, L'Osservatore Romano. For those who don't know, that's the official Jesuit publication for the Vatican, the most high profile of all Jesuit outlets. And the headline is Young Artists from Around the World to Talk About the House of All. Anyway, well, we could be thinking, well, what do you mean by young artists? What does this have to do with salvation? Oh, you're going to hear. Don't worry. This will show you that there is nothing new happening in Rome. We are still governed by the same people. They still have the same power that they had before under Francis, and that business continues, unfortunately, because what you're about to hear is essentially word salad theology, a theology of the new synodal church. It's not very Catholic, though. The article is 2 paragraphs long, so you can hear the whole thing for context. 55 photographs from every corner of the planet to bear witness, but above all to connect through art, with nature, with humanity, with its essential spirituality. The Borgo Laudato Si in Castel Gandolfo, recently inaugurated by Pope Leo XIV, hosts until October 3rd the works of young photographers, selected for the Earth Partners Prize competition by a team of experts, mostly young themselves, but including established figures, such as art critic Hans-Ulrich Obrist. The exhibition, presented this morning in the Sala Marconi of Palazzo Pio in Rome, aims to recount our common home, that would be creation, that would be Earth, its wounds, its cares, the resilience of so many populations affected by extreme events, and also the fear and anxiety that accompany the new generations, as explained by Mariana Beltrami, young artistic director of Emotions to Generate Change, a partner in the initiative. The exhibition presentation, which also features some of the young artists, was introduced by Father Lucio Andrian Ruiz. Art is not simply ornamentation, said the secretary of the Dicastery for Communication. The Dicastery for Communication is essentially how the Vatican communicates with the media and with the outside world. Key here. This priest is the secretary. He assists the cardinal. It says, it is the ability to open an interior space, immersing the visitor in the experience of calm and depth, in contrast to the frenetic communication that often makes us feel fragile and powerless. Art restores humanity and hope to us. It is not a rhetorical commitment, but a concrete one, listening and engaging our resources. Hear the prophetic voice of Laudato Si. That's Pope Francis's encyclical on care for our common home, the green stuff, basically, published in 2015. And the creativity of the contemporary world, a dialogue in which faith and art illuminate each other. Cardinal Fabio Baggio, secretary of the Laudato Si Advanced Training Center in Castel Gandolfo, was present at the press conference presenting the exhibition. The cardinal also clarified the meaning of Christian commitment to the environment in the face of those who would like the church to focus exclusively on the spiritual care of souls, their salvation. So here is the Vatican's response to those of us who want them to talk about the 4 last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. That's what we want, right? Our first concern is our soul. Here's their response to all of this, demanding they focus on this. From the lips of a cardinal of the church, we are called to challenges. No, he says, when we speak of salvation, we speak of integral salvation, the cardinal clarified. We are called to challenges to which we must respond. I want to recall Genesis chapters 1 and 2, which calls us to have two consciences, the awareness that everything we enjoy is not our property, and the awareness that it is our responsibility to care for it. Moreover, Amber Olson Tostino, one of the founders of the Earth Partners Prize, added, what you will see is not resignation, but positivity and determination. It is an invitation to think, feel, and act to save all of humanity. So, let's talk about this for a second. This is materialist nonsense. Art restores humanity and hope to us. Really? Look, art's important. The true, the good, and the beautiful point us to God. Good art can do that. But does art restore humanity? I was under the impression that baptism restores you to humanity, that confession restores the grace of baptism, that the Eucharist helps restore humanity. I thought the sacraments and Jesus Christ restored humanity, not art. This is a weird thing. A dialogue in which faith and art illuminate each other. The faith is illuminated by art. This is wild stuff coming from these guys. It says, when we speak of salvation, we speak of integral salvation. In other words, salvation that includes materialism, the material world, making a better world. You hear them talk about this stuff all the time. We are called to make a better world, which, by the way, I didn't know that. I thought, unless you mean the effect of spreading the gospel, remember all about the salvation of souls, you convert the peoples of a country, of a nation to the faith, and they then live as Catholics, you will have, obviously, social effects of that, massive ones. If that's what they're talking about, that'd be great. But that is not what they're talking about. That is never what they're talking about, because they keep using this word dialogue. And when you put this in the context of synodality, where we're all supposed to have a good conversation with one another and listen and accompany each other in our faith journey, but not actually call people to conversion. You see that this concept of integral salvation is nonsense on stilts. It makes no sense. This is just a buzzword that sounds very secular, that they've applied the concepts of salvation to. But then they invoke also the Garden of Eden here. I want to recall Genesis chapters 1 and 2, which calls us to have two consciences. The awareness that everything we enjoy is not our property. Well, that's a fascinating thing, given if you've actually read Genesis. And the awareness that it is our responsibility to care for it. He got half of that right. We're to be stewards of the earth. That doesn't mean embracing the Kumbaya green program. It means not making a dump of the place. It means making sure that future human beings have access to the resources of the earth that God gave us all. It's also not an anti-property thing, though. The church has always and unequivocally protected private property. So why do they do this stuff? It's because they believe that the church needs to remain relevant. Save the church by embracing modernism and heresy and secularism. You're going to hear, if you watch the news video I have scheduled to go public right after this live stream is over, you'll hear another cardinal of the church in that video talking about how you have to essentially stop resisting modernity and, by extension, modernism to save the church, and that rigid, fuddy-duddy cardinals and bishops have no clue about what it is they're doing, and they need to get in line. You'll hear a very important cardinal talk about that. I highly recommend you check that out. They believe the church needs to remain relevant to reach young people and all this stuff. But it turns out young people don't want that. What young people tend to want is some of that old-time religion, actual serious demands made upon people, reverent worship and belief that you have to live according to certain rather ironclad rules. That's what they want. They don't want integral salvation, whatever that nonsense means. So we go here to the Telegraph, An article from almost a month ago. It's worth noting here how out of touch Rome is with this. Headline, belief in God doubles among young people. Atheism, the belief of no God, has fallen in 18 to 24-year-olds from 49% in August 2021 to 32%. That's still a large number of them, 1 in 3. But it's better than 1 in 2 as it was before. Something happened between before 2021 that caused this, and I have a pretty good idea what it was. It was a number of factors. First and foremost, the events of 2020, shutting society down, tyrannical turn from the left, all of that. But also, young people grew up in an educational and social environment where their teachers and their school administrators, whether they were in kindergarten or college, all just hammered home the message. They did that constantly. But also, Hollywood, in the years leading right up to this, had gone full woke. I mean, just completely off the deep end. And you'd think that would mean that they'd be susceptible to falling into it. And certainly, all you have to do is go look at the case of Charlie Kirk to see what happens when young people are exposed to this. But it looks like something is happening leading up to 2021, where now half of people are believing God. Half of young people. Now, that's still not great, but it's a movement in the right direction. Here's the details of this. A belief in God has doubled among young people in the past 4 years. More than 1/3 of 18 to 24-year-olds now believe in a supernatural deity, up from just 16% in 2021. The YouGov survey findings also reveal that atheism, the belief of no God, has fallen in the same age group from 49% in August 2021 to 32%. The poll, which did not break down the respondents by religion, appeared to support claims of increased belief in Britain amid a quiet revival in churches in the growing redacted population. And that's certainly important for there. But we've seen the same numbers in the US as well. We've all seen it. Younger people turning to conservative and traditionalist expressions of Christianity, whether that's the Orthodox Church, traditional Catholicism, conservative, we'll say ordinary form Catholicism, maybe high church Protestantism. We've seen all this happening. So it's not just the Saracens in the UK. The Right Reverend Jill Duff, the Bishop of Lancaster, told the Telegraph that Britain was undergoing a spiritual awakening. I'm not surprised by this, she said. It's very much what we are seeing on the ground in our churches. There's been a trend in this direction, that the younger you are, the more spiritually open you are, for quite a number of years, and we are seeing a real openness to God and Christianity, and especially to the supernatural in the younger age group. I think there is a spiritual awakening. The 2020 affliction led to a big increase in prayer, for example. There was a global week of 24/7 prayer coming up in September. The data is that as people pray, the nation spiritually awakens. This has been the case for generations. This has been the case since the cross, honestly. You see the data here, right? I don't really tell you what most of these colors are. Oh, there it is. It says that light blue line, I believe there's a God or there are gods. And you see it, and then it takes a dip at 2025. But you see the kind of trend, right? It's probably going to go back up. The red, I do not believe in any sort of God or greater spiritual power. Decline. Downward trend line. Dark blue, I do not believe in a God, gods, but I do believe there is some sort of spiritual greater power. Weird idea, but okay. Trending, kind of starting to trend up, we shall see. And then, of course, I don't know. It stays basically steady. I mean, you could draw a straight line through that, and the mean would be basically steady. The Right Reverend Marcus Walker, rector of St. Bartholomew the Great in the city of London, said young people were attracted to faith because the presumptions of humanism and new atheism had been proven to be bunk. There are all sorts of things that seem to be bringing young adults to church, but the most important seems to be a thirst for God, by which I mean that they seem really interested in the intellectual and spiritual side of religion, he said. They're much less interested in seeing the modern world reflected back to them with a religious tinge, and much more interested in discovering a world which has its roots in something far deeper and more profound than today's squabbles. Why is this happening? Humanism and new atheism rely on presumptions that enlightened humanity will advance inexorably towards liberal democracy and great prosperity. The last 25 years have shown this to be bunk. We've had wars, financial collapse, incompetency, handled worldwide affliction. On top of this, the modern managerial world is trying to slay all the ways in which human beings interact socially. Church provides people with a place to meet and make friends across generations. This is like gold in a world where anything that looks like fun is shut down by HR busybodies. Where's the lie? Sorry. All this may have led to a rediscovery of what it means to be human, how we interact with the world now and eternally. End quote. Good stuff. All of that true. 100% true. And the fact is that young people turning this way is probably linked also to that weird sort of political rightward turn that young people seem to be taking. Now, it's not the same conservatism. It's not the conservatism of your parents or even of older members of this audience of your generation. It's not that. It's the new right, whatever that shakes out to be. Probably going to look a lot more like Trump and J.D. Vance than Ronald Reagan, honestly. But that's where young people are headed. I don't think those two things are separate at all. Let's look at the different reactions to the Charlie Kirk situation that have happened. And you can see the divide. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't show you also kind of the backdrop to some of this. A bishop that I've covered before on this church, or on this channel rather, has issued a new letter published by Marco Tosati. And for whatever reason, now it's translated. It didn't translate before. So I translated it myself. I'll probably use my own translation anyway. But it's Bishop Marian Eleganti. He's kind of a retired auxiliary bishop, but still at the mercy of Rome. And so when he says these things, he risks getting canceled. And the headline here is, Vatican II, the spring did not happen. A critical examination is urgent and necessary. So this brings us back, I think, to that bishop who was talking about integral salvation. This attempt to modernize and materialize the faith. The problem you run into with that is if your motivation is to keep the church and the faith relevant, which they said at Vatican II was one of their motivations, watering down the faith and secularizing it, in this case, putting bureaucratic language into the faith, like who thinks that's a good idea? Doing that doesn't make the church more relevant. It doesn't make Catholicism more relevant. The gospel is always relevant. You cannot make it more relevant. But they don't understand this. They expected a springtime. We didn't get one. Bishop Eleganti is not the first to say this. Schneider has said it too. That's why I think he's one of the best. Because he's willing to admit there's a problem with Vatican II. And it needs to be addressed more so than just with addressing ambiguous language. He thinks there's actually a problem baked into the cake of Vatican II that needs to be addressed. Immediately makes him one of the best bishops. Here's Bishop Eleganti's letter. Like I said, before I went live, it wouldn't translate. For some reason it did while we were covering other things. So I used one of the best translating algorithms online to translate this. So let's go over the article. Vatican II, the promised spring never came. I was born in 1955, and as a child, I was an enthusiastic altar boy. At first, I served according to the old rite, that would be the traditional Latin Mass. Always a bit nervous about getting the Latin responses wrong. Then, in the midst of it all, I was retrained for the so-called New Mass. As a child, I witnessed the iconoclasm in the venerable Krzyk Church of the Holy Cross in my hometown. The carved Gothic altars were torn down before my eyes. Only the people's altar remained, the choir empty, the cross and the presbytery arch, Mary and John on the left and right against bare white walls. New expressive stained glass windows, flooded by the sun rising in the east. Nothing else. It was an unprecedented clean break. We children thought it was all normal and appropriate, and we diligently saved for the new stone floor, thus contributing to the reform and restoration of the church. The euphoria surrounding the council was carried everywhere by the priests, and synods were convened, in which I myself, as a young teenager, participated. I had absolutely no understanding of what was happening. At 20, I was a novice and experienced firsthand, painfully, the liturgical tensions between traditionalists and reformist progressives. New ecclesiastical vocations were introduced, such as married pastoral assistants. I remembered my critical observations in these matters. The tensions and problems slowly emerging between ordained and non-ordained ministry were predictable from the start. The collapse in the number of candidates for the priesthood was foreseeable and soon became evident. As a young man, I had an unreserved attitude towards the council, and later I studied its documents with faithful trust. However, from my 20s onward, several things caught my attention. The desacralization of the choir, the priesthood and the Holy Eucharist, as well as the reception of communion, and the ambiguity of some passages in conciliar, meaning from the council, documents. I quickly realized all this as a young layman still lacking theological education. Although the priesthood was the strongest calling in my heart since childhood, I was not ordained a priest until I was 40. I grew up with the council. I grew up witnessing its impacts from the very beginning. Today, I am 70 years old and a bishop. In hindsight, I must say, the springtime of the church did not materialize. What followed was an indescribable decline in practice and knowledge of the faith, widespread liturgical informality, and arbitrariness, to which I myself partly contributed unknowingly. From today's perspective, I view everything with growing skepticism, including the council, whose text most people have already abandoned, invoking its spirit instead. Over the past 60 years, what hasn't been confused with the Holy Spirit and attributed to him? What was called life but did not bring life instead of destroying it? They wanted to rethink the church's relationship with the world, reorganize its liturgy, and reassess moral positions. They are still processing it. The hallmark of their reform is fluidity in doctrine, morality, and liturgy, alignment with secular standards, and the ruthless post-conciliar break with everything that came before. For them, the church was primarily founded starting from 1969. That would be the Editio Typico Orde Mass, or the basically publishing of the new Mass. Here, he's referencing a book about that, though. What came before can be ignored or has already been revised. There is no going back. The most revolutionary among the reformers were always aware of their revolutionary acts, but their post-conciliar reform, their processes have failed across the board. They were not inspired. The people's altar was not an invention of the conciliar fathers. I myself celebrated the Holy Mass in the New Rite, even privately. However, through my apostolic work, I have rediscovered the ancient liturgy of my childhood and noticed the differences, especially in the prayers and postures, and then, of course, in the orientation. In hindsight, the post-conciliar intervention in the nearly 2,000-year-old, highly consistent liturgical form seems to me a rather violent, almost commissarial reconstruction of the Holy Mass in the years following the Council's conclusion, associated with great losses that must be addressed. This was done in part for ecumenical reasons. Many forces, including Protestant ones, were directly involved in aligning the traditional liturgy with the Protestant Eucharist and perhaps even the Sabbath liturgy of our so-called elder brothers. This was done in an elitist, disruptive, and ruthless manner by the Roman Liturgical Commission and imposed on the entire church by Paul VI, not without causing serious fractures and cracks in the mystical body of Christ, which persist to this day. One thing is clear to me. If you can judge a tree by its fruits, an urgent, ruthless, and truthful reassessment of the post-conciliar reform is needed. Historically honest and meticulous, not ideological and open, like the new generation of young believers, who neither know nor read the Council's texts. Nor do they have an issue with nostalgia because they only know the church in its current form. They're simply too young to be traditionalists. Yet they have experienced how parishes function today, how they celebrate the liturgy, and what remains of their religious socialization through the parish. Little. For this reason, they are not progressives. Liberal Catholicism, or rather progressivism, from the 1970s onwards, most recently under the guise of the Synodal Way, has, from today's perspective, run its course and driven the church against a wall, leading it into a dead end. The frustration is correspondingly great. We can see it everywhere. Sunday and weekday services are mostly attended by the elderly. Young people are absent, except in a few scattered hotspots of the church, which are rare and far apart. The reform is still self-managing because no one attends or reads the outcomes. It's an iron law. How can we still consider the post-conciliar reform so uncritically and narrowly, measured by its fruits? Why is an honest confrontation with tradition and our ecclesiastical history still not possible? Why do we refuse to see that we are at a crossroads and should review the books, especially liturgically? The being or not being of faith and ecclesiastical life is decided based on the liturgy. Here, the mystical body of Christ lives or dies. Traditionalists and progressives correctly assessed this from 1965 onward. So why is tradition on the rise among the young? What makes it so attractive to them? Think about it for a moment. The feet vote, not the councils. Perhaps we should simply change direction. Understood? Clearly, he's writing that towards his brother bishops. But the feet vote. What does that mean? That means if young people keep going towards traditional Catholicism, you're going to see normal parish life disappear. This is an observation made by several tradition-aligned bishops and priests, by the way, that it's just a matter of time before the church has to re-embrace tradition to some degree. The demographics will demand it. Now, that might come with a functional collapse of the church, though, reduced to a remnant. We shall see. But we know that like 80% of young people raised in the ordinary foreign parishes leave the faith. They may come back at a later time, but 80% of them leave. Those are not sustainable numbers. And yet the bishops don't do much, instead talking about integral salvation, whatever the heck that is. Now, I'm very curious what you think of all this. I know that what he says will be hard for some people. Traditional Catholic says the people's altar. The term disturbs me. Get used to that term. Get used to it. You will actually see more of that, I think. Richard Corwin, I saw my timeline from YouTube that there was a high mass in Latin with a female altar boy. I'm thinking, what the heck? Okay. Was that actually a traditional Latin mass or a reverent Novus Ordo? Sometimes they can be hard to tell apart in some places when they're said by some priests. But yeah, female altar boys are not typically allowed at the traditional masses. You might see them, though, at diocesan parishes. It's one of the reasons why some traditionalists will tell you not to attend a traditional Latin mass at a diocesan parish. I don't tend to go go that far with things. But that's... You won't see that at the FSSP, the Institute of Christ the King, or the SSPX. If you're going to see that at a TLM, it'll be a diocesan one, almost certainly. Roseanne Rossi, I didn't get the notice until now. I'll have to watch from the beginning. Yeah, that happens, and that's been happening a lot lately. This is why I tell people to use your subscriptions tab, not your front page of YouTube. All right, folks. I'm curious, though, what you think of this in the comments, please. So let me know. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Share this on social media. That helps too. Pray for everybody we spoke about today, including that integral salvation bishop. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.